Welcome back to Deep Thoughts on this rather, indecisive day of windiness. You don't notice these kind of things until you make a show like this, but you'll walk out and, it's all still and I'm setting all the equipment up, and then, I swear to God, 10 minutes later, it's like, oh, we decided to be a windy day. So today I'm setting up, and I have like 4 or 5 different ideas about what the show could be. And I just, sometimes I rush out and I got an agenda. I'm going to do this show. Just did the moon evidence show in the garage yesterday, and so that was just very intentional, Today is one of those days where I'm setting up, but I'm not quite sure. What am I going to do? I haven't touched dreams in a while. And, the only reason why I hesitate on that is that I usually have to have some substantial improvements or additions to my understanding of dreams before I'll talk to you guys for 1 hour about it, right? And so I've got this interesting situation in my own life, and I hinted at it or tried to describe it in the previous episode. I have no idea which one. I don't even know if it was this season. But what I want to call this particular episode is something related to the act of grasping reality. Because I don't think that we actually consciously think about the fact that when we wake up, we just accept what we're processing as our limitations, right? What is the reality besides just a paradigm of limitations, right? Apparently this fucking helicopter. I'm always fascinated by the human process of accepting limitations, even when they're not there. It's the old story of the elephant being pinned down to the ground. So as a baby, they pin them down with a big stake in the ground and they can't move it. But by the time they get older and they're the size of a frickin' house, they could pull that thing out and leave, but they've brainwashed themselves into believing that a rope to a little spike in the ground is enough to hold them in place, right? We do this to ourselves all the time. We do this to ourselves in relationships. We do it to ourselves in our careers and our personal travels. And I think we do it when we wake up and when we go to sleep. It's interesting that when I was a kid, they used to talk about flying in your dreams. And later in my life, somebody said that was good luck. But, I didn't hear that kind of crap when I was young. But someone was talking about it, and I actually did it in a dream. And I'm not sure if I went to bed going, I'm going to dream tonight, and I'm going to fly. It just happened. And then it was one of these reoccurring things that doesn't happen often, but the circumstances will come together, and if it's fun and cool to fly, I'll fly. And I've had a fair amount of conversations in the last couple of years with people who've never done it, and there's this sort of remorse in their voice, a sort of like, God, I wish I could fly. And of course, in my brain, I'm thinking, now wait a minute, this is a dream. Why on earth could you not fly if you wanted to? And a big part of it has to do with believing that you can. But what's interesting about flying in a dream is that you do have to enter a dream with your human brain, your soul brain, whatever it is, right? And you accepted in this particular reality that you can't fly. So to have the idea that you could possibly fly in a dream, with or without lucidity in your dream, right? I don't think, obviously I probably can't honestly say I remember the first time I ever flew in a dream. I know several times that I've flown in my dream, and I wasn't having the lucid bit turned on first and then, oh my God, I'm in a dream, let's fly. Usually when I get lucid in a dream, there's like a 10 to 30 second countdown before the dream's over. But here's the thing, when you can fly, when you can do anything in your dream that you can't do in this reality, then you're really massaging that muscle, that technique inside you that grasps at a particular reality that is the trivial reality that you are sold as a kid. Again, no one's trying necessarily, especially in your close circles, to deceive you. I know there's a lot of folks that believe that we've been deceived into this reality, and you might be right. That's what we're going to talk about. The latest thing I've done that's more interesting to me than flying, even though flying is pretty fun, is telekinetics in my dreams. I've had it for quite some time, but it's the need to do it which is causing the rarity in the dream for it to happen. But there'll just be moments where I'm in a dream, and it is, it's a vain thing as much as it's a fun thing, because in your dreams you fly because it makes people look at you and you're special. You move stuff around the room and it makes people go, you get this distinct sense that they can't do it and you're special because you can. And I don't know what that is in humanity, but it exists in, I think, a lot of us. So most of it's, as you grow up, those kind of things become entertainment. Well, let me show you what I can do that you probably can't do, and it's to entertain you. It's not to make you feel bad or anything like that. But I talked about this thing that occurs to me every once in a while, and I can't really figure out any cyclical nature to it. I can't really figure out whether or not it's happening a lot or a little. But I will be somewhere. It's usually when I'm moving in a vehicle, which is really odd. And now that I think about that, that's probably the case. It's strange because I haven't... I'll tell you another example after I get done with this one. But what ends up happening is I'm traveling. Just residential. Doesn't have to be highways. It could be highways. It sometimes does happen on the highways. And I get this overlay in my mind's eye of a different world. It's Earth world. It's humans. But it is a much better world. The design is really beautiful. It's very lived in. It's very manicured. It feels peaceful. So the people who are riding the cars next to me, if I'm driving on the highway, because sometimes it's just like being in some movie where it's an overlay and all of a sudden it's futuristic. It's not Blade Runner. It's not, George Jetson kind of crap. In fact, it's just a little bit ahead of where we are today. But it almost feels like a parallel reality that, yes, they're still using combustion-based cars, maybe, I don't know. But they still have highways, and they've now figured out how to... It would almost be as if every designer became a Frank Lloyd Wright disciple, and they decided that, yes, everything should blend in, structure should blend in with nature and vice versa. A lot of times. Sometimes I will be in a broad daylight, beautiful world like today, and the one I'm seeing is a nighttime, recently rained Hollywood shot. But the visuals are impressive, and they give me this wonderful feeling, but of just being rewarded by, oh man, that's neat design, and it will just show up for like a split second, like should be like 1 second. So it fades in and fades out within the second. Which seems like a really short period of time, but it's such a profound feeling, and it's so real that it's interesting. But it is sort of like a hint of a reality. I don't have a true, super duper reality replacement of what I'm seeing. It is more like up in here in my mind's eye. It's really strange. But in almost all scenarios, and I'm going to think of all the ones I can remember offhand, it's a much more balanced world. Like the people feel to me like everyone's calmed down. It doesn't mean there's not arguments. Doesn't mean someone doesn't. I don't know. I don't get the idea of theft or anything like that. But whatever. There's probably still issues. But so this happens to me. And I don't think it's increased in any way, shape, or form. Maybe it has, but not much. And I've been noticing, I don't know if this has been going on my entire life. Because here's the thing. I grew up in the 70s. As a, birth to 10 years old. And the 70s obviously had tremendously different design principles. My father was definitely into, the latest and greatest of things, and so I was able to see, even if it was just pictures, a lot of places that I don't know if the neighbors' kids were seeing it. Then I got to travel, and so I got to see a lot of that. I saw stuff as a 0 to 2.5 in Europe that I don't really super consciously remember. So I don't know if that's part of the influence. It doesn't feel European, but I have this host of memories from the 70s of locations that I can't remember ever being at ever. That very 70s, extremely 70s designs. And so I'm starting to wonder today, how long has this thing been going on, right? It's a very peaceful, very gentle thing. It's not like you will suddenly drive off a cliff or, go rampaging through some mall. But the other day I had something interesting happen, which was I tasted for the first time in a dream. And I mean, it was unbelievably accurate. A friend of mine had said they're going to get me some special hot sauce because I love really exotic, super hot sauces, right? Even if I can't eat them as quickly as I'd like. And so I had this hot sauce stuff in my brain. And in my dream, I was in sort of a vineyard of hot sauce peppers. Super hots. And someone was like, oh, you should taste this, you should taste this. And it's sort of hanging on this wooden lattice, which was very basic. It's probably about 2 feet wide. And about the first one was 4 feet, a little 1x1. And then another one. And they're just hanging off, because they need a place to grow, which is strange because most of them grow on little bushes. But I picked this little red one off and I eat it. And the taste I got was very unique. It was orange lime. And it popped in my mouth. I got the citrusy lime thing. And I remember it hit me and I was like, wow, I'm really tasting this. Yeah, I got the lime thing. And then I moved to the next one over and then I woke up. So it was very, quick moment from the moment I ate this thing, the moment I woke up. So then I'm thinking, okay, finally I know that I've tasted something that wasn't in the room. I hadn't eaten a lime in a while, and I certainly haven't eaten an orange in a while. So those aren't recent tastes that I've had in that particular day, week, or month. And now I'm resurrecting those impressions in my mind for a dream. So for the rest of that day, it's like 2 days ago, I'm thinking, okay, how was that possible? It must be that, there's a memory inside my system for tasting this, although I can't remember ever tasting orange and lime together in one bite. It was almost like one of those little tangerine things, those little tiny ones, I forgot what they call them. And like one little tiny slice of that had the lime in it as well. It's really strange, man. It was very pleasant. So then it started to dawn on me that if I can take memory patterns, right, memory tracks, as they would say in Twilight Zone, and push them into my dreams for all of the 5 senses that I have, what stops it coming back the other way? A dream state coming into this state. Now, we know there's some people out there that we might label as less than on planet Earth. I'm not really talking about that. I'm talking about a useful mechanism by which we can sort of pull back from the technique of grasping reality involuntarily speaking, and get to a point where we can start, it's like when you peel a sticker off that looks like it's embedded in something, like you didn't think it was a sticker, but you kind of put your thumbnail on it. Oh my God, there it is, right? And it's really going to be careful to pull it off because it's going to rip or tear or whatever. It's one of those situations. We're trying to find the little lip, the 90-degree turn in thinking that would give us additional control over our grasp of reality. And my suspicion is that there are things that we do to actively grasp reality every day that we don't consciously recognize. And I'm wondering if we can, through triangulation and discussion and analysis, find those mechanisms, right? There's been a couple stories out there about floors in buildings that are hidden. There's some Twilight Zones that do that. And it's just over my life I've seen this where like either an elevator stops at a floor that it normally skips. It's either the tippy top floor or the 13th floor. And there's just some mezzanine floor. In fact, there's there's a film out there that actually had a floor that was really short. And so everybody was in this building. They were doing business. Maybe it was like a Monty Python thing. I can't remember what it was. In the Twilight Zone is the state between being awake and being in a dream state, right? We all travel through it every single day. And Rod Serling, I think, in his many intros and exits and the various changing theme, opening monologue of his show, it was always as if he was saying people take a turn and go into this layer of the Twilight Zone instead of going straight through it like a membrane, right? So it'd be like taking a turn into the Van Allen belts and just staying there and finding the Nexus ring, and Captain Kirk's in there, right? I think a lot of people don't think about having dreams. They just simply have them, which is sort of how reality works, right? You wake up, you just inadvertently accept it, and then you allow things to happen to you. Maybe that's okay. I mean, obviously it serves most of us. But for those of us who are trying to be the Magellans of reality, we need to develop some tools, some thinking, some methods of enlightening not only ourselves, but each other and then others outside, right? There's the famous scene in The Matrix where the kid bends the spoon. And it's probably one of my favorite lines in the entire movie because Neo's looking at him. And the cool thing about Neo's character is he has no ego. Right? He grabs the spoon, and the kid says, it's not that you're bending the spoon. It's that you're bending reality around the spoon. Something to that effect, right? And he looks, and sure enough, the spoon turns, and then it comes back up. That one sentence flips the entire paradigm of what you're trying to do to get to the goal that you're trying to get to, right? You want to bend the spoon? Well, the spoon's not going to bend. Bend reality around it. And then you get what you want. How do we apply that to our notion of grasping a particular reality over another? The other fictional piece that I like to think about when trying to abstract yourself away from reality, and probably very few of you have actually read this, but The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which I mentioned off and on, it has a great scene in it where I'm trying to figure out a way to get everyone up to speed. They're trying to find this guy named Zonny Woob, and they find out that he is hiding inside of a universe that is inside of his office. And they want to ask him the question of who actually runs the galaxy. And the whole thing is really about being woke to who runs the galaxy. And they end up, through a bunch of different turns, finding this weird mystic guy that lives on the edge of their accessible galaxy. He has a cat. He lives up in a cabin by himself on the coast, I think. And he will not accept any reality, 100%. And they ask him, and they finally find him. They go, "Are you so-and-so?" And he goes, "Well, I think I am." And he says, "Well, do you run the universe, or do you run the galaxy?" And he's like, "I don't think so. I'm not sure." And they said, "Well, do people come to you to ask you questions?" And he goes, "Well, I think they do. I think that what I'm seeing are spaceships coming, down from above, and that these men come out and they ask me questions. I think they're doing that, Lord knows, blah, 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 blah." And he said, "Oh, you said the Lord. You believe in it?" And he goes, "No, my cat, I call him the Lord. At least I think he's a cat." Right? It's this very interesting method of talking such that you never quite convince yourself conclusively that anything is real. Now, I don't think any of us want to be living in the final act of altered states where we don't know where the hell we are and what reality and what timeline. But it might be interesting for us to label. We say labels are bad. I think this label might be good. To label the reality that we accept as the particular reality that we're in, right? I think a lot of you do this anyway. If you believe you're in a matrix or in a firmament dome or you're in some heliocentric ball, regardless of what you think, or you're undecided, you think there's a fourth thing, the idea might be really healthy to go, okay, when I wake up, when my soul returns to my body through the silver cord attachment, and I'm starting to look through this John Malkovich machine, which is my body, this is the reality that I am accepting currently. But when I go to dream world, I am not really resting at all. My body's going to remain 99.9% completely intact, running all the operations, right? The only thing that's going to change is I'm not necessarily walking, talking, and moving, so my muscles get a chance to repair and relax. And I think there's got to be some need for the soul to leave the body, in my opinion, which is why everything has to rest. It's bizarre, right? There's no need for everything to rest. There just isn't. For us to be on this perfect cyclical thing that you're awake 18 hours a day and then you sleep 8 hours a day and then you wake up, and insects do it, and birds and bees and all that stuff, right? There should be something that just stays awake. Just, it's efficient. It has no need to release itself. That's not the case, is it? Now maybe little single cell bacteria and some amoebas and that kind of stuff, they probably go balls out until they die. But this is what I do to dream, is that I really feel like my dreaming is just going to another world and living 8 hours or whatever I'm getting, 6 to 8 hours, right? I also feel like my dreams have a particular location. It's sort of like a new Disneyland, but it's in a caricature form, like the map, right? Wherever I am. Usually some random community of some sort. Could be very lived-in city with skyscrapers. That's very common. Sometimes I'm back in my hometown, but it's in the future. Sometimes I'm just inside some wild home in some neighborhood somewhere. Time of day could be all times of day, but what's interesting is I'm sleeping anywhere between the sun being down and sun being up, depending on how I'm working on a particular month. And so it doesn't seem to correlate with my dreams. So it could be dark outside and I'll be dreaming light, or I'll be light outside and I'm dreaming dark. So doesn't seem to be any adherence to that. But the other one is that my locations will only last about a week. And then I get a new location. It's like a second hand or a minute hand on a clock. Okay. I got the 1 o'clock location, and then I got the 2 o'clock location. It takes a week or so to get to the new spot. Sometimes I outwardly request before going to bed a new location. Like I'm done with that one. It's been 2 weeks now or whatever. It's gone a little bit long. Let's go to somewhere new, and somehow something changes it. Now the other really interesting one about locations is that a lot of times they can be influenced by what you've done before you go to bed. For those of us guys who have played video games for hours and hours and hours, you might play a Fallout game, or I was watching these raid videos of Rust. Rust is a game that released in 2013. It is probably, of all the games I've ever seen that are first-person survival kind of games, which is the only objective this game has, Rust is probably the most difficult game I've ever seen. You start out naked with a little rock in your hand. And if you die at any point in time, no matter if you're level whatever, there's not really levels I don't think, but if you have all this stuff on you or a rock, people can take everything off of you. It's the old 1998 MMO design. I watched a couple of these videos before going to bed a few days ago, and then my dream was sort of watching Rust raids. It's interesting. There was no real context of watching a raid where I could get excited about something getting stolen or knocked down or a building getting broken into. It was just watching these guys run around. And it was so repetitive that I got tired of it. And I woke up from it and I was like, I don't want to see that. So I went and looked at other things on the web in bed so I could kind of wash my mind out of this other thing I had seen. But now the weird thing about this overlaying thing that I experience, and it's very rare. I mean, it's probably, I don't know the frequency. It might be a really heavy frequency. It might be like once a month, maybe. And sometimes it comes in at like 10%, and sometimes it comes in at like 100%. Very vivid. And it's one of those moments when you sort of drift off in thinking. For those of you, you daydream and you imagine, maybe you're a creative person and your employment relies on you being creative. So you're always kind of chewing up an idea. Or sometimes you're just absent-minded for a split second. You're relaxing, right? I don't mean absent-minded in any bad way whatsoever. And it harkens to that scene, I think it's in Indiana Jones 3 with Sean Connery, where he and his son, Indiana Jones, are stuck in a tower, some Nazi castle they've taken over, and they need to get down. Germans are coming. And his father says, well, you know what I find is that if I just sit down and relax, the solution comes to me. And he sits down in a chair, and the chair is rigged to a lever in one of the legs, and boom, a staircase appears, and they get out of there. Well, you need to understand that when you watch movies or television shows, and it's the good kind, right? Even if it's the bad kind, this what I'm about to tell you is very important to remember. A human being wrote the script. And so they chose the words and they chose the thought process they're trying to put in your mind because it comes from their own personal experience. Either be it observed and not experienced by them personally, or it's their little trick. And so a writer wrote, if I sit down and relax and empty my mind, the solution comes to me. That might be a little trick of that particular writer. And it may be a solution for actually writing. It might be a solution for everything, For those of you who've ever had an epiphany in the shower, it's happened to me numerous times. It hasn't happened to me in a while, but I don't really have problems that are of that nature right now in my life. What is it, though? What is the step just before you have that epiphany? You're in the shower. And obviously, when you get into a shower, all of us have our routine, whether or not you do your hair first or your body first or whatever. And then you might sit and wait, just to get warmed up or cooled off or let your air conditioner do its thing, whatever. And I find that when I get that 60,000-foot stare, that's when the magic happens. And it's like this bundle of solution. And it's a complete solution. It's amazing. A couple of years ago with my startup, I was looking at some hardware that feeds LED screens. And I'm looking at this hardware and I'm realizing that the hardware that drives the imagery into these machines that slice up the image that then sends it off to the LED cabinets, which then further slices it up into the tiny little cell phone screen PCBs, they're all using off-the-shelf stuff. And so they're like, well, I know how we can get this to work. Use off-the-shelf this, off-the-shelf that. Then we'll develop this. This is unique, which will talk to the LED screens, which are also being developed every day. And I start looking at the paradigms of the technology, and I'm sitting there going, there's got to be a better way. Now, the first thing I needed to do to find this other solution was to have the feeling, this is ridiculous. No one else in the room is thinking this is ridiculous. Everyone else in the room is thinking this is the way it's done. These are the paradigms, limitations of this technology. There will be no other technology. Well, when I discovered this other methodology to streamline this whole thing and make it so much easier to increase the integrity of the signal, to be able to protect it better than any attempt previous to protect the actual data coming through, meaning the imagery and the sound and all the other DCI level movie stuff that has to occur, I went home and wrote a 75-page document on it, proving that theoretically this is completely possible. And it was that document that essentially kept our company funded for another year. Now, some other things happened that blew it apart at the end. I think my investor alone was not... He was an older guy, and I think he was just looking at a really long haul, and he's like, man, I got a kid. I got a brand new little kid, and I got 3 older kids, and I'm going to go live my life. I'm going to enjoy life, and this is for someone else to invest in. And I don't blame him. It's always disappointing when that kind of thing happens. And then through some other fuckery, we're unable to regroup and go find new investors. And so I decided to go partner with a company that actually deals with that technology directly. But there's a super commonality with those epiphanies. I'm curious if you guys have had the same thing. If that is true, now let's just say that's true. Let's go with that. We all get the 60,000 foot stare. We're in a sort of a daydream mode, whether we're standing in a shower, we're driving in our cars, or whatever. And we get these bundles of total solution. It's not the source code necessarily. It's not the words in your script, but it's definitely the stuff that's going to get you to create that stuff for yourself, right? I think the universe is extremely... well, let me put it this way. I think the purpose of the universe is to feed you concepts that will turn into potentially opportunities. Concepts that will hopefully spark you into developing a talent, which is just any discipline that you're good at. And then by getting good at a discipline, this is what we call luck. You know, luck is hard work. You have to be good at something to take advantage of luck/opportunity, right? I mean, I'll give you a really crude example, but there's a lot of folks out there that want to be rappers or musicians of any kind. But rappers is a really easy one because it's a guy that writes lyrics, walks in, someone sells him a beat, and they make music and then money. Well, imagine somebody wants to be this, and one guy, there's 2 of them, right? One dude is doing it all the time. He is rapping everywhere in his mind. He's exhausting all of the basic words that have been in all the previous lyrics that he or she has heard before, so they don't reuse them, so they don't sound like some old rap. And the other guy is just doing everyone else's stuff and doing it really, really well. And maybe he can do like a super fast rap and he gets it all down, but he doesn't quite have the idea of writing his own stuff. Or if he does, it's really tough. And when he does a rap battle, it doesn't sound fluent, or, you know, it just is a train wreck, right? So both of them are going to get a chance to meet some big-ass producer, some Dre. And he's got time to listen. Well, he's going to listen to one guy who's regurgitating a bunch of crap, and he's going to listen to the person that's coming in with their own stuff. Well, who's going to get the job? Who's going to get the contract? Who's going to get the opportunity to try and create anywhere between 12 and 20 tracks to create an album? The second guy. Or I should say the first guy I mentioned, right? The one that's really practiced. The reason I mention that is that it's sort of the more that you do that sort of exercise with yourself, with whatever you're doing, you're visiting this mechanism constantly, your creative flow, the river of knowledge, right? And so it's the talent and the job and the dream that's forcing you or inspiring you to go to the river of knowledge, instead of waking up in the morning and maybe thinking of yourself as a Nostradamus, right? As I just mentioned in another episode. What if you got up in the morning, you have a cool pad, and you look out at the world, and you realize that they all look to you. As soon as they see your face, they go, oh, have you got any more predictions of the future? because that's what we rely on you to do. You're that special person who dedicates your life to seeing the future. My buddy Sid Mead, that's what he does. He does it in a fictional way, but he looks at everything all the time. You know, someone was busting my balls about the difference between being brilliant and being a genius. I said, well, you know, maybe I have the definition confused between the two, but go ahead and tell me what you think. I don't think there's been a reply yet in the comments. I would say Sid Mead is definitely both, even if they're different definitions. But now, some of you might have very normal jobs. Some of you might be going to college. Some of you might be very overwhelmed with your current responsibilities. And not that it's a negative thing. It's just you have a couple kids and you got a spouse and you got a job. Maybe you got two jobs. One you love and that's your side thing when you come home, and then one that you got to go to pay the bills, whatever it is. And you might think, well, I don't have time to do all this experimentation with who I am and the reality that I'm grasping. I think you do. I think you do. And I think you do it anyway. For any of you who've ever said the statement, if you would have told me a year ago that I would be doing this right now, I would have told you that you're crazy. I don't know how many people actually have that experience. I would imagine it's less than more. But once you've had that experience, you've changed your career, for instance. Even if you've suspected it in your mind, well, I'd really like to do this, but I don't know how to get into it, and finally you get into it. You realize that you can change your life on a dime merely by convincing yourself that it can be done. When I grew up, there was no internet, and so knowing what was going on in New York or Los Angeles was the matter of watching maybe a rock video, seeing some movies, some television show, which we all know is kind of a caricature of reality. Maybe you see a documentary that's a little more intense. And so if you wanted to be in the Midwest of the United States of America, and you wanted to be a comedian, an actor, a singer, it was a tough haul for you to grasp that reality. And your family and friends, at least in the 70s and 80s in the Midwest, would not necessarily be supportive, because they too have no knowledge of how this is done, and therefore it would seem an impossibility perhaps to them. And there was in the 80s, for those of you who didn't live in the 80s, I remember seeing one interview after another that said that people who succeeded were like, you know, my parents were first very disappointed when I said I was going to become an actor or a comedian or whatever the hell it is, singer, because they worried about me bottoming out and having no money. Now, unfortunately, probably more than 51% of them do not succeed, and I attribute that almost exclusively to them having more ambition to get the status of being that than the ambition to get good at it, right? With all skills, let me just tell you the secret before we get back on track here. For everything you want to get good at, if you just simply get good at it because it is something that you want personally for your life, you will eventually entertain other people with your personal entertainment mechanism, right? Prince always said, I make music that makes me feel good, because the music doesn't exist, and I want the music to exist. And so he worked really hard to learn all the instruments, right? I think when he passed away, you know, I think he played over 40 instruments in all of his songs combined, right? Probably even more than that. But honestly, he only needed about 4 instruments. Guitar probably being played 2 different styles, from lead to rhythm. Then you got your bass, your keyboard, and your drums. With those 4 things, he could create any of the music that he loved. And he did. But he created it for himself first, and then everyone else liked it. Steve Jobs always said, I'm creating products that I like, and you like them too. And if he ever changed his methodology and said, I'm going to listen to a marketing firm tell me what the people want, he says, at that point, we're going to lose. And that's why I think Apple's having major issues at this point, right? But isn't a life A and a life B that's completely different, that you could personally live both of them, aren't they technically little subsets of reality? When I moved from the Midwest to California, my first job in California was working for Jim Hall Jr. Racing. And I just looked him up the other day, and he doesn't look like he races the kind of things that we were racing back in the day. We used to race the little carts with the K, sort of like $10,000, looks like go-karts, but they're open pipe carts. And very expensive, very professional. They have centrifugal clutch, 2-cycle engines and that kind of stuff. But I went from, really being accepted in my hometown for all the reasons I've mentioned in the past, family, lineage, and that kind of stuff. I managed to live the last, I think, 4 years of my life there before I graduated high school, coming off of other 6 schools I went to before that. And so it was a good world where I came from. I left, I went to California, and now I was working for a race car place. And I'm thinking to myself, this is a whole nother reality. I live on a beach area. I go to a racetrack. I go to other racetracks locally. I am hanging out with these families like the Unser family, the Hall family, the Firestone family, all kinds of other reps coming in. The girls were all over us, young guys. So we go to a party and sit in a jacuzzi, and there was really nothing that they wouldn't do for us. It's really weird. I'm like 18 years old. Most of the kids are between 18 and 22 or somewhere in there, right? So I was taught very early that you will get rewarded sometimes proportionate to your risk, which is one of the classic phrases you'll hear people who have done it will say to you. Nothing risked, nothing gained is the cliche. It's very true. Most cliches have, unfortunately, a lot of truth behind them. And we poo-poo them away from us because they are cliches, right? About 3 months later, I find myself in a software company, now able to take advantage of all my artistic digital talent, all my programming talent, and I was off to the races. Just climbing through this company at this enormous pace. It was a tiny company, so the husband and wife, the Morgan family that invented this product, was you could go talk to them. Even though Michael, the core founder, was more aloof because he was more private with his life. But still, surrounded by amazing talent. Another reality, completely different than my race car reality. I got laid off. 2 days later, I'm a video game artist. Professionally. All my money is coming from that venture, right? And it's old school stuff compared to the stuff we do today, but I just kept pushing and pushing and pushing and never telling myself that I can't do something. Quite the opposite. And I mean, the amount of weird-ass jobs I've had from, I'll just throw a couple at you just so that you understand that once you stop just digging your claws into where you are and saying, I certainly would like to change my life and make it better, but then you're hanging on. You can't just let go and go, woof, I need to jump out of this plane. I got a parachute on. Not sure where I'm going to land. Doesn't look too bad down there, right? Sometimes you know exactly where you want to go. It could just be a profession in your brain. It could be a physical location you need to move to or visit or whatever, right? But I had a friend of mine, Southern California is really awesome about networking. And so when someone needs something, they just tap all their friends. It's crazy. The amount of startups I was involved in was crazy, several of which I've talked about on the show. But I had one guy come to me to design silk suits, right? Because he goes, well, you're an artist, right? I said, yeah. And he goes, you dress pretty wild. I said, yeah. He goes, this guy's looking for some new designs. Go for it. Hey, if he doesn't take it, that's fine. If he takes it, good. So for, 6 months, I was drawing all kinds of different suits. Very 80s kind of, wild suits and stuff. I don't know if the guy ever actually ended up using any of this stuff, but I was delivering them in, getting good feedback. I was probably an idiot, right? Because I could have made some money off of it and maybe even stayed in the industry or whatever. I think it's Einstein that's credited with saying this phrase, I believe, but it's something to the effect of, reality is simply the most popular fiction. And there could be multiple layers to that statement, not quite the Matrix level interpretation we might have on this show because we're very open-minded on this show. But he could have meant the people of the world believe a fictional reality. You know, they believe we went to the moon. They believe the revised history of why wars occur and why people are assassinated and all this other stuff. And if you get to the upper echelon of people, they start to kind of whisper to you, you know, that's all bullshit, right? And you're, oh, yeah, it is. I know it is, right? It doesn't predict anything. One of the things I used to say in the first season over and over and over again was, you know, truth predicts reality. It predicts the future. And like if I say this cause and effect model works, like you do this and it creates that effect in your life, then if it's true for you, it'll work. If it's not true for you, it doesn't work. And so you throw that one away. Or maybe you analyze how you're executing against the cause. Maybe you need to work a little harder, right? If I say practicing the guitar makes you better at the guitar, and you practice, and you're no better than you were in your mind than you were when you first started, maybe what you're practicing isn't the right stuff. You need to get someone else to teach you what you want to know about the guitar, right? But as I said in one of my first dream episodes, why do we dream? Why do we dream, man? Why do we go to bed? Why do we fall asleep? Why can't a human being rest in bed all day and then not have to sleep that night? You're still awake in your bed, but you haven't moved your body much, right? You don't tax your mind that much. Maybe just watch some TV. Maybe you're sick or something, or you just need to be lazy for a day. In that particular case, why would you be on some cyclical need to go to sleep? Now, your doctors and your neural scientists will tell you, well, you got a bunch of chemicals in your body that start to secrete into your system, which put you to sleep. Okay. But usually in either divine intervention design or evolution, depending on whichever way you come to, you both are going to be coming to the same conclusion, which is you have things because you need them. Now, there's still a bunch of mysteries with that, which is like, why do guys lose their hair? Why do we get hair on our ears and our backs later on in life? I mean, it's like, well, why is that happening, right? But sleep is this thing. Now that we have the metaphor of computers, for those of you who play MMOs, right? You might know that the server goes down on a particular day for a few hours while they're backing up all the data. If you set your computer up to auto-update software or the operating system, you know that might happen in the middle of the morning at 4 o'clock while you're asleep, and you wake up and it's saying you need to restart. Okay. If this is a matrix of some sort, maybe we all need to be upgraded in the middle of the night. What if it was like this? Let me throw this one at you for grasping realities and determining where you are in this universe. You pine all day for change that you would like to have in your life. You wish you were more something than you are now. Maybe you need to wish for being less of something, less lazy, less angry, less whatever. You need to be more devoted, more creative, whatever. And what if when you go to bed, I'm making this up, but just think about it for a second. While you're asleep, I have an episode called Dreamscaping, which is sort of this, but this is a little bit more on point. Your OS, that is your soul-body symbiotic connection, upgrades, and it gets you a little bit closer, not a full bore thing. You don't wake up, being a completely different person, but you wake up and you've ebbed a little closer to your goals because you're slowly defining your goals, right? Now, let me take that a step further in a more fictional sense. Well, let's just say you had contact with the Oracle, God, whatever you want to call it. And you say to God before you go to bed, you go, look, I really wish I had become this. Whatever that is. What should we say? I'll say a rock star, because I know a little bit about that. And God's looking at you in your bed and saying, okay, well, you're a little old for that, or you don't know anything about what you're really talking about. I'm God, I know, right? I'm the person who wrote the operating system that allows rock stars to become rock stars. So let me well, God would have two choices, right? More than two, but let's just say two basic ones. God turns it on tomorrow, and all of a sudden you wake up and your history has been rewritten. You actually have at least an album that is popular. You have a band that you didn't have before. I'm assuming if you have this notion, you're probably some sort of lead participant in your endeavor. And you're all of a sudden on the road. And you're on a bus, touring. Even if you're on a big private plane, it doesn't change much. And then you start getting exhausted. You have record execs up your ass for the next album. They're like, look, you guys need to be writing some new stuff here because we're going to come off this tour in 9 months. You're like, 9 months? Oh my God. You're on the road constantly, right? Doesn't matter how popular you are. Doesn't matter how fancy your bus is. It doesn't take the edge off of the constant grind of this process. So you're having to pine for the next show, but they want you to pull out the guitar or whatever you play. You're a lyricist, you're a singer, whatever, and you're having to pound out something. And it's not just writing a song for writing a song's sake. They want you to write an album that's better than the last one that you wrote. Now, obviously, you're probably getting better at your skills the more that you perform in concerts. You're learning more about what the audience wants. You're also shape-shifting yourself as a person, not literally, but you're changing your performance. Did Freddie Mercury walk on stage as the lead singer of Queen on the first day and have all of his stage presence that he did the day he died? Hell no. He learned that. He learned tricks. He did something serendipitous, and he said, wow, they really reacted to that. When Gene Simmons broke up a fight once in the band Kiss, some guy was beating up somebody, and he reached down and punched a guy and kicked a guy in the face or whatever, and the crowd went crazy. Then he started paying people to do that so he could create that fictional situation again, which made the crowd go crazy. Well, I think that our overall maestro knows that if you went from relaxing every day and going to the beach and chilling out and enjoying your family and your friends to immediately being transposed onto a bus, driving around, performing, you have great gigs, you have horrible gigs, you now, when you get a cold, it's like the end of your career, right? What is it? Axl Rose just barfed his way off the stage after being on for however minutes he went on. He did 20 out of 27 songs. I have to say, if that story is true, that guy, you have no idea how hard that was for him to do that, right? Doesn't matter if you like the guy or not. That is a boss that says the show must go on. So it doesn't happen like that, in my opinion, because you can't handle that delta, that change in your life. Some people could, maybe, but I think they would be fibbing a little bit about how easy it was to transition into that. And sometimes that happens to bands that work really hard in the basement, and all of a sudden the album goes out, and it's pretty much that level of transformation. But now, what is a more healthy way to do it? To ebb into it, to slowly acquire that, to go through all the pain and frustration of creating your first album, performing in little tiny gigs, and realizing that the mistakes that you're making on stage were in front of 10 people instead of 25,000 people. It's much better to do all those mistakes in front of a smaller crowd. We don't usually think of the universe this way. And when I say universe, I mean whatever your definition of reality is. Whether you think you're a piece of binary data in some memory bank somewhere, if you think you're really organic memory in this universe, right? It might be that the universe simply is perfectly designed to control that popping mechanism of going from state A to state B. It doesn't allow for gigantic changes in reality. Maybe it's not like that, but we accept that that's the way it works, and so we never really see giant changes in our lives. Now, for any of you who've ever gotten a job that you really dig, that you just couldn't imagine having before you had it, like when I started drawing video games, pretty much a lot of those careers I was telling you, for me it was like a big change. But in most cases, other than the race car thing, which is very short-lived, I had pined to be an artist. I had pined to be an engineer, a software engineer. And so, a story writer and all these different things. And so, when I got there, I'd had experience in this. Even when I was doing these silk suits, I had drawn plenty of really cool apparel in the 80s as a teenager. Leather jackets that I would have loved to have had, or cars that I would have loved to have driven. I think a big part of reality is the word accept. ACCEPT. To accept something in your life, to take it in, to allow it to be your reality. You know, if you've ever had a bad relationship in your life that went on longer than it should have, then you accepted that toxic situation for your life. And you have good reasons why you did it. You probably learned a tremendous amount about how to have a good relationship by being complicit to a bad relationship. You know what a good job is because you've accepted a shitty job for a while. When you get a good job, boss or superior or CEO or whatever that's running your company, and you've had some bad ones, you're like, oh my God, I'm in heaven. And it's inspiring to you. But let's talk about, before we end this episode, a common phrase called the reality distortion field. I think I touched on this a long time ago, but this is a good time to recap this thing. Steve Jobs was known for having this reality distortion field. And the interesting thing is that it was initially communicated to others from his circle that this guy is crazy. They called it the reality distortion field initially because they were like, this guy wants the impossible. He wants us to accomplish things we've never accomplished, which we believe at the onset are impossible. The creation of the Macintosh computer is probably, if you study it, is one of the most remarkable pieces of proof that the reality distortion field is real, and that you can apply it to your life immediately. And once you feel this work in a fairly cognitive way, in this reality, right, the one that we always accept, it might help you in engineering your reality to whatever the hell you want it to be. Now, I'm going to tell you, when Steve Jobs died, what happened? They greenlit a movie with Ashton Kutcher like fucking right away, because there's a group of people that don't want you to recognize his talent, and they don't want you to be like him, because they want to control you. And if you are as smart as him, you're going to control your life, and you control probably other people's lives who are going to willingly be in your distortion field. That didn't go over very well, so they then greenlit the Fassbender movie, where he played Steve Jobs. And it was all about taking his shit on him because he had this daughter. There was a contested custody thing. You know, he was like, well, I just slept with this girl a couple times, and she had this kid, and now I need to care, and I'm a very genuine person, and, you know, I don't just hand out love because these circumstances occurred. Now, eventually he reconciled everything, and it was cool. But they wanted to take a shit on him. And so what I have to hear sometimes in the comments, but a lot of times in other forums, is how Steve was not everything that they said he was, and not everything that he said he was, which is very interesting, because that guy, I don't think, said much about what he was capable of doing besides, I think, having a visual eye and style, right? But the invention of the Macintosh computer is probably one of the most unequivocal moments in this guy's life where he proved he was absolutely a visionary and a genius. As I've had it communicated to me through various forums multiple times, he walked into a room of, like, I believe 12 engineers, some being hardware, some being software. I think it eventually rose to 15. He put a book on the table, an average size book. And he said, okay, guys, the footprint of this computer that we're going to make is going to fit on that book. We can pull the book away. We can draw a line around the book, pull the book away, and when we put this computer down, it's going to fit inside that little tiny rectangle. Now remember, computers back in the day, even the Apple I and II, were desktop computers. Very cool looking on the Apple side. And then IBM came out with their personal computer, which is why we call it PC, I think in 80, 81 or so. and it was a big, giant, heavy steel box, and just some farty green DOS monitor and that sort of thing, right? But these engineers had to think different right away. Well, we're going to have to make a PC board to run this computer. It's probably bigger than that footprint right there. And so he's like, okay, you're going to have to make 2 PC boards. One that goes across the bottom, it's got power. One that goes across the side inside, that's the CPU and all the brains, all the ROMs that hold all the operating system stuff. And then I want you to create an operating system that takes advantage of what we learned from the Lisa, which was an acquisition that was meant to die, and the stuff that they did at Xerox PARC. Again, Steve is accredited with taking the Xerox PARC concept and giving it its true reality, right? Being able to double-click a folder, put something inside of a folder, standardizing fonts so they're readable to the mind, no matter how old you are, the Chicago font. Just tons of brilliance. Scroll bars, all this really cool thing. A soft mouse controller, had fuzzy logic in it. For those of us that were Macintosh people and PC people at the same time, you'd move a mouse on a Mac, and it had this fuzzy logic, this acceleration, deacceleration algorithm in it. But when you moved it on a PC, it was so brutal that the second you move the mouse, no matter what happened, this cursor is moving exactly to the analog reader. It's in your mouse. It was too brittle. It was too. You couldn't get fine-tuned things to happen because you could barely move it just 1 pixel. It'd move like 10 pixels. And Steve figured that out. And Steve had this thing softened out. But these programmers and these engineers and these UI designers all lamented after the fact that they thought he was crazy. They said he was extremely driven and rude to them. Okay. And the reality distortion field really had one principal mechanism in it, which is he believed it could be done. He believed he picked the right people to get it done, but they initially didn't believe they could do it. And then history proved they all not only could do it, but they did do it. And for those people, again, that whatever want to engage in criticism on it, what is Microsoft Windows now? It's the same principle as the GUI Mac. What is Ubuntu? It's a GUI Mac. It's much better. You might actually end up saying it's more like a Next computer, but he was able to convince people that they could do something that they didn't think they could do. I think that's super duper important. I've hired in my lifetime several employees that had basically no experience, and I simply told them that I completely believe in them. And when they doubted themselves, I pointed out that their portfolio proved that they had the talents to either grow into what we needed them to be, or they already had them, right? A couple key employees that I brought on board were 2 females, 2 different positions, 2 different companies. One was my company and one was Electronic Arts. I think I mentioned one of these 2 in the past, but one girl, I can't even recall her name at this point, but she was living in San Rafael, California, which was quite a ways away from Electronic Arts, which was in Redwood Shores. We're talking about 2-hour commutes. But a buddy of mine was chatting with her, and in some chat software somewhere on the internet, and he was needing a website. He had seen her website, said, "Man, you're building a new web department at EA." And I'm like, "Yeah." And she goes, "Well, you should talk to this girl. She's pretty amazing." I said, "Okay." So I talked to her, and she shows me her stuff, and I'm looking at her coding. I'm looking at her design. I'm thinking, wow, this kid is really talented. She was 18 years old. So I said, "Hey, I got positions. If you want one, I'll bring you in." Electronic Arts at the time, very tough company to get into. But I said, the internet's opening up opportunities at this company that's never been, around before, where it's easy hire moments, right? Because I'm building this team. So I hired her. She worked for me for 2 years and eventually quit because she never left San Rafael. I thought she was going to move local, and she was driving like 2 to 3 hours a day one way. And she said, "I really just want to spend time with my family. I really appreciate everything that you've done. You've given me a huge portfolio now." I don't know where she is. I hope she's super successful. But she, at 18, just imagine you at 18. Most of us, we're way past that age. We look back and Some of us really had a huge grasp of what life could be, but most of us don't, you know, especially in the area of believing in yourself, because believing in yourself really has to do with your group, your parental group around you, or your influencers, right? Crow be gone. But the second one that's very memorable for me was when I started my own game company about halfway through the 10-year run, and I went to my cousin's wedding in San Diego. I sat next to this couple, and this mother and I started talking, and she said, my daughter's graduating from the Academy of Art in San Francisco, and she's looking for work. I said, oh, really? I said, well, you know, I've got positions open in my company, especially for a good artist. Send her over. Okay. A couple weeks later, she comes to my company, and she had just barely kind of ebbed into digital art. She was a fine artist. So she showed me a bunch of paintings, and I'm like, that's not really, it's great, but it's not what I need. So keep showing me stuff. And she finally showed me her sketch portfolio. Amazing. Disney level sketch art. I think she works for Blizzard right now. But I had a project coming up, an internal game we were going to make. I said, I think you're perfect. I talked about her in the past, but she absolutely nailed it. Absolutely nailed it. And in her mind, I'm sure it was going home every day going, holy crap, I'm doing what I want to do. And I've just graduated college. The reason why I'm giving you these examples is that these are the kind of things that you need to tell yourself. You need a reality distortion field around yourself, but it's got to be on a solid foundation, okay, of your dedication to what it is that is your skill set. When it comes to dreams and reality, what rules are there? I'm not sure there are any. I think we're trying to write that book right now. All of this content in this episode is essentially the creative theme, your perception theme, and your paradigm theme of how you grasp what you're capable of doing. From a professional realm all the way back to the more esoteric, what reality am I in? For those of you who are deep-rooted flat earth believers, I think you have something very interesting. Again, I went on it, that binge on that for at least 4 months, and there was, again, that time I was walking down by Crystal Cove on the beach with my girlfriend, and I looked up at the sky, and I thought, I felt the dome. I felt the firmament dome. I don't know if it was God-based dome or whatever, but I'm looking at this thing going, wow, it could be. It could be. Isn't that amazing? It's a paradigm shift in my brain if it were, right? But for those of you who are devout believers, when you go outside and you look up, I'm relying on you guys to have a completely different, mega epiphany of what this reality is. Even if you're wrong, doesn't matter. That's a skill set that some might call, what is it? Johnny Depp in the movie Don Juan, where he thought he was Don Juan. He was impersonating this character, he was sort of a gigolo who played Don Juan, like the real Don Juan. And they eventually gave him a drug, I think in the third act, to make him give up. It sort of sedated him in a way that he couldn't have his imagination, destroying his reality distortion field. He was adhering to a do no harm regimen, I think. And let me give you one more sort of esoteric example or theme of examples before we close out. I've mentioned in recent episodes the fact that a lot of times I was going to say crimes, because the one I'm thinking about is the one where when banks went from analog to digital, they obviously started relying on computers to take care of the ledgers. And when it all got situated between the banks, and the triple DS encryption allowed them to communicate between each other, and I say, I'm bank A, you're bank B, I'm going to give you some money, I'm going to process, banking fees or whatever. These guys stole a fraction of a cent and put it in a separate account. Banks didn't notice it for a long time until this one account just started accumulating hundreds of thousands of dollars without any real depositor showing up to give it money. So eventually a lot of them got busted. But think about it. It was this little tiny thing that someone started noticing, and they manifested their attention on it and eventually got it to a point where it became something very active in their brain. And then they hatched the scheme on top of that little tiny thing to then create a whole new reality for themselves, which is a bank account full of cash, right? How many times in our personal life have we had these situations where you're living a normal life and there's a little something that is in your life that you barely notice it at first, then you start noticing a lot more, and then you're like, whoa, this is something that I think I'd like to do for a living. A lot of people become chefs, become cooks, because they always, you're never told when you're a kid you're going to be a chef, usually by your parents or whatever. It's usually, for the culinary experts, they have a very, very focused drive on that particular thing. But a lot of folks in all countries, all around the planet, they become chefs. They start their own restaurants, what have you, because they realize that they always paid attention to the recipes in their family. Then they started paying attention to recipes outside. Then they started gaining food theory. This is too salty. This is too sweet. Well, when I added a little bit of this and that to it, a little citrus lime, it tasted better. Boom, a career pops out of nowhere because of that little tiny snowball that started rolling down the hill, right? When I start mentoring someone on their career, on their life, which doesn't happen very often, but it happens, typically I tell them, look, we'll have as many sessions as it takes for you to find what you love in life, right? And season 1 has a lot of this in the self-improvement area, where I lament in detail what I do with folks. But there's a episode, I think, called How to Get a Job. And for anyone who wants to transition your career into something that you love versus something that you're doing, go grab that episode. But one of the things I just focus on with people is what makes you tick as a human being. Do you like to give? Do you like to take? Do you like to entertain? Do you like to spectate? Do you like to critique versus create? Once you find whatever it is, the core theme of your being, what is your purpose on this planet, then the careers that suck for you immediately show up in red, and the careers that you love show up in green. To do a traffic light analogy. When you're grasping reality, this is the mechanism, in my opinion. We tend to have a more existential goal with the content in this show. From the shape of the planet, your existence, to maybe a matrix example, to whether or not we have divine creation or evolution. All these paradigms are very limiting or very expansive. It's either limitless or it's either infinite or finite, right? We all need to make a decision for ourselves personally what we're willing to accept. We overlay our bias on top of those things. What's important, what's not important. At times in my life, for instance, I've made a lot of music. I haven't made music in a really long time. It's a real bummer. I used to just crap out music for all kinds of different projects. And so I've always had that bug in me of like, man, should I really try to work on, like right now my big thing is vocals. I love singing. It's cool. I do really powerful vocal stuff. Okay. So for me, I thought, well, I've got a few more years where my look will work. I could definitely pound it out. I need to definitely increase my endurance, so I could sing 20 songs or 30 songs with maybe 2 breaks for a particular evening. But the more I started meeting my buddies in the rock industry and looking at their lives and the grind that they go through, I sort of made a decision where it's like, that looks fun, but I don't know if I have the time or if I'm willing to make the sacrifice in my life that is required for that talent to really hit professional levels in all areas, I should say, right? Like I have songs I'm really built for and songs I'm not built for, but they're really popular and you have to sing them if you're going to do a bunch of cover stuff, right? Could write my own stuff, but then that's a huge endeavor in itself, right? Just watching the bands from the 80s try to stay together. Oh my God. And that's a nightmare into itself. So I opted out. But it was a very meticulous process before I made the decision to do that. I think everybody needs to do that with everything that you have on your list. Some of you are lucky, you only have one thing on your list. Some of us are cursed with like 10 things on our list. 10 things that we know that we could be experts at if we just applied ourselves. So you look at your life, you look at your cycle, you look at your age, look at your energy levels, you look at the longevity of what you would be doing. Like if I started now, what am I going to have? 10 years of that and then it's over? Well, I hope to live a lot more than 10 more years in my life. So I'm investing in things that are going to reward me until I die, right? Careers that I'll literally die at my desk doing. That's a success for me, no matter when I croak, right? I think that's about it. Hopefully this was valuable to you guys. How do we grasp reality? Give it some thought. Interested in your comments. Any one of the things I mentioned in this episode that rings true with your own personal experiences. If you have your own reality distortion field, you've had success. I think that'd be really good for everyone else to hear. And don't be bashful about big comments, like long comments. You've got some folks that have really invested they have like short one-page essays that are just phenomenal. You read them and you're so much more enlightened when you get done. So don't be bashful. Throw it out there. Anyhow, if you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. Audio, video, lock Facebook group, Patreon page. Take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over and out.